The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, crisp and officious, a paper-thin declaration of war disguised as a community reminder. It spoke of bylaws, of harmonious living, of the sacrosanct nature of aesthetic conformity. It also mentioned my boat, my beautiful anachronistic wooden skiff, moored at my dock, on my lake. The audacity was breathtaking, a parasitic organism mistaking its host for common ground. They, the self-appointed arbiters of suburban tranquility, the Homeowners Association, had decided my boat was an eyesore, an affront. They hadn't a clue. They saw a resident, a nail to be hammered. They didn't see the bedrock beneath. A faint tremor of amusement, cold and distant, passed through me. This would be instructive for them. They prided themselves on rules. I, on the other hand, understood the immutable laws of cause and effect, of action and consequence. Their first volley was a whisper of incompetence. I wondered if they were capable of comprehending the silence that would follow my response, the kind of silence that swallows sound whole. Petty, yes, but the tendrils of petty tyrannies, left unchecked, have a way of strangling the life out of things. And I had things I valued, things I would protect with a stillness that belied the storm gathering within. They thought they were trimming hedges. They were about to learn the difference between gardening and deforestation, conducted with surgical, unblinking precision. Their tidy little world, documented in endless HOA emails filled with passive-aggressive pronouncements, was about to encounter an inconvenient truth, one that had been dormant, waiting, like a legal filing time-stamped for future delivery. Then came the formal demand, the escalation they probably imagined would bring me to heel. $500,000. The sum was so grotesquely disproportionate, so theatrically inflated, it was almost comical. Almost. It landed on my doorstep with the thud of unearned authority, a document dripping with self-importance and thinly veiled threats. A violation notice magnified to the point of absurdity. For parking my boat wrong. My boat. On my dock. In my lake. The one whose water rights I owned, whose depths I knew, whose shoreline was mine down to the last grain of misplaced sand some developer hadn't managed to pave over. I read their missive, each capitalized word, each citation of a bylaw that had as much jurisdiction over me as a decree from the man in the moon, and a cold smile touched my lips. It was the smile of a predator assessing prey that had not only wandered into its den but was now attempting to redecorate with tasteless, unenforceable regulations. The sheer, unadulterated delusion was a marvel. They lived in a world of painted lines and manicured lawns, believing their little fiefdom extended to the horizon, or at least to the waterline. They had mistaken proximity for purview. This wasn't just ignorance. It was a willful blindness, a symptom of the petty power that corrupts absolutely, even in the cul-de-sacs of supposed paradise. The letter trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the contained energy of a response already formulating, a response that would be precise, final, and entirely unforgettable. They wanted a battle of paper. I would give them a lesson in ironclad reality, backed by blueprints and deeds they'd never bothered to consult. The inevitable summons arrived in the form of a woman whose name, I later learned, was Brenda. She was the physical embodiment of the HOA's puffed-up self-regard, a walking, talking violation notice with a perm so rigid it seemed capable of deflecting criticism. She stood on the edge of my property, just beyond the ancient, moss-covered stone wall that marked my true boundary, her arms crossed, radiating an indignation so profound it practically shimmered in the afternoon sun. "We've issued the fine," she announced, her voice tight with the thrill of imminent conquest, a monologue she'd clearly rehearsed. "The $500,000 for the boat. It's improperly moored." I regarded her, a curious specimen of suburban belligerence. "Is it now?" My tone was mild, almost conversational, the kind one uses before delivering a particularly unpalatable truth. A strategic inner commentary playing out in my mind about the tactical advantage of calm. She puffed up further, a flush rising on her cheeks. "And if you don't comply, we'll be forced to call the authorities, the police. They'll handle it." A flicker of something, smug triumph, in her eyes. The deadpan sarcasm I'd been cultivating slipped its leash. a strategic deployment. "Oh, please do," I said, the words like chips of ice. "Call them." "I insist." Then the status revealed twist, delivered not with a flourish, but with the flat finality of a closing door, a rhetorical flourish to punctuate impending justice. "You see, Brenda, there's a small detail you seem to have overlooked in your zealous pursuit of aesthetic purity." I paused, letting the silence stretch, watching the certainty on her face begin to curdle into confusion. "This lake? It's mine. The land under it, the water in it, the dock you're so concerned about. All mine. Your rules end where my property begins." Her jaw quite literally dropped. The crimson tide that rose from her neck was a fascinating study in sudden, dawning horror, a dramatic lighting change on her emotional state. True to her word, or perhaps her bluster, the police were called. 2 officers, looking more bored than bothered by yet another HOA dispute, rolled up, their patrol car, a stark blue and white, against the muted greens and browns of my land. Brenda was practically vibrating with vindicated fury, pointing dramatically towards my dock, my boat, my egregious defiance of HOA sovereignty, her voice escalating into a near shriek. I watched from my porch, a mug of cooling coffee in hand, the picture of cold-blooded calm. This was theater, and I knew my lines, knew the denouement. The officers listened to her tirade, a practiced patience etched on their faces. Then, they turned to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply presented the documents. The deeds, the surveys, the water rights agreements, all meticulously organized. Each page a nail in the coffin of Brenda's righteous crusade. On-screen text, in the movie of my mind. I saw the shift in the senior officer's eyes first, a subtle widening, a dawning understanding, followed by a weary sigh that spoke volumes about his prior dealings with HOA overreach. He straightened, his gaze turning back to a now silent Brenda. He began, his voice polite but firm, the reluctant authority figure legitimizing my position. "This is private property. The lake, the dock, it all belongs to him. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." Brenda spluttered, a strangled noise of disbelief. But the bylaws." The officer cut her off, his patience wearing thin. "The bylaws don't supersede property law, ma'am. In fact," he added, a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice as he pulled out his own notepad, "you've initiated a false report. That carries a fine." The sound of his pen scratching on the pad, creating an official record, was sweeter than any symphony. Brenda's face, a mask of apoplectic rage, was the first visual cue of her impending public embarrassment. This small victory was a tactical strike, a precision hit against their inflated sense of authority. Their defeat at the hands of the law, however, did not chasten them. It only seemed to fuel their resentment, transforming their campaign of petty harassment into something more insidious, a moral violation that pricked at the edges of my carefully constructed calm. The official letters stopped, but the whispers began. A cowardly chorus from the silent majority, too timid to openly rebel but happy to contribute to the miasma of negativity. Anonymous notes appeared, tucked into my mailbox, filled with misspelled invectives and vague threats, the cowardice of the unsigned word. My wife, my emotional anchor, mentioned the cold shoulders at the community pool, the sudden silences when she approached. My children, whose innocence I guarded fiercely, asked why Mr. Henderson from down the street, a man whose lawn was his personal Sistine Chapel, suddenly pretended not to see them. This was no longer about a boat or a bylaw. It was about an attempt to ostracize, to isolate, to punish me for refusing to bow to their paper-crowned monarchy. A cold anger, different from the earlier amusement, began to solidify within me, an explosive emotional undercurrent beneath the surface of somber resilience. It was the anger of a man whose sanctuary was being encroached upon, whose family was being made to feel unwelcome in their own vicinity. They had crossed a line, not a property line marked on a plat map, but a moral boundary. My resolve, already firm, hardened into something akin to tempered steel. They mistook my legal, precise dismantling of their initial claim for a singular victory. They failed to understand it was merely the opening move in a campaign they were ill-equipped to fight. They were about to learn that some fires, once stoked, do not easily burn out. They consume with righteous fury. The dormant authority within me stirred, not as a reluctant warrior, but as a protective guardian, fueled by protective loyalty. Brenda, it seemed, took the HOA's collective impotent rage and personalized it. Perhaps she saw it as a slight against her very being, her leadership, her meticulously crafted persona as the enforcer of all things beige and orderly. One sun-drenched afternoon, my security cameras, those silent, unblinking sentinels I'd installed with foresight, recorded her latest transgression. The zoom-in on her approaching figure was cinematic in its clarity. She didn't just stand at the edge of my property this time. She marched onto it, her face a mask of fury, her destination clearly my dock. The footage was damning. Her deliberate stride across the grass I meticulously maintained, her aggressive posture, the way she ignored the clearly posted private property no trespassing signs that I had with foresight installed after the police incident. It was a brazen act of defiance, a deliberate escalation. This wasn't about an incorrectly parked boat anymore. This was a direct, personal challenge, an invasion captured with thermal camera precision in my memory. She was on my land, uninvited, unwelcome, a physical manifestation of the HOA's festering grudge. An intensely personal wave of something cold and sharp washed over me as I reviewed the footage later that day. The air in my study seemed to drop a few degrees. She was no longer just a misguided nuisance. She had become a tangible threat, a symbol of the unchecked arrogance that believed rules were only for other people. The explosive emotional undercurrents I usually kept tightly leashed surged. This was not going to end with a polite letter or a minor fine. This required a more definitive response, a tactical retaliation. Step 1. Observe. Step 2. Document. Step 3 was rapidly approaching. The dock was old, weathered cedar, silvered by years of sun and rain. There was one particular plank, third from the end on the right, that had always been a bit suspect. I'd made a mental note to replace it, a task perpetually on the to-do list, overshadowed by more pressing matters. Or perhaps, subconsciously, I'd left it, a small, almost imperceptible flaw in an otherwise well-maintained structure, a trap for the unwary or the unrighteous, a visual metaphor for the rotten underpinnings of their authority. Brenda, in her blind rage, wasn't looking where she was going. She was crashing out, as the youth might say, a term that perfectly captured her uncontrolled aggressive momentum towards my boat, presumably to enact some imagined justice. Her movements jerky and furious. Her foot came down hard on that specific plank. There was a crack, not loud but sharp, like a bone snapping. Then, a shriek, abruptly cut off by a much louder splash. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it caught her flailing descent, the sudden disappearance of her furious visage beneath the dark, placid surface of my lake. Her cries echoed for a moment, thin and desperate, then sputtered into gasps. I was in my house, observing the live feed, a cup of tea steaming gently beside me. I did not move. My inner monologue was a cold, tactical assessment of the situation. She was a trespasser. She was acting aggressively. She had caused her own predicament. No one else came. The neighbors, whose ears were usually so attuned to the slightest infraction of HOA dogma, were suddenly, profoundly deaf. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated, dark situational irony. She, who had sought to control every ripple in the community pond, was now consumed by waters that answered to a higher, or at least more ancient, authority, mine, and that of gravity. The water, the blood of the earth, claimed her briefly. The aftermath was quiet, eerily so. Brenda, sputtering and soaked, eventually managed to claw her way to the shallower edge of the dock, dragging herself out like a half-drowned muskrat, her fury extinguished, replaced by a shivering, ignominious defeat. The pristine anger was gone, washed away, leaving behind something sodden and pathetic. No cavalry arrived. No concerned neighbors rushed forth with towels and sympathy. The silence from the surrounding houses was a testament, perhaps, to their own quiet resentments, their own unvoiced grievances against her reign of terror. They were the silent majority turned rebellion fodder. albeit passively. My inaction was calculated, precise, morally unflinching. I had no legal obligation to rush to the aid of a trespasser who had come onto my property with clear, malicious intent and then suffered an accident entirely of her own making due to her reckless abandon. Morally, she had made her choice when she stepped over my boundary line, the fence of my domain. The cold, hard truth settled around the incident like silt. Actions have consequences. She had sown the wind. She was reaping a rather damp and undignified whirlwind. The dramatic lighting change, in this instance, was the slow descent of the afternoon sun, casting long, unflinching shadows as she finally, miserably, slunk off my land, leaving a trail of lake water and shattered pride. My porch light remained off, a symbolic withholding of solace. Control had not yet been fully restored. The final act was still to play out. Her fall was not the climax, but merely the predicate for my own response, a response that would be delivered with cold, calculated vengeance. The time for passive observation was over. The time for tactical retaliation had arrived, a move I'd been planning with the precision of a military operation. While Brenda was presumably nursing her bruised ego and her damp clothes, I was drafting a different kind of missive. Not a demand based on inflated bylaws, but a legally sound, ironclad claim, a weaponized narration of her transgressions, $500,000. The figure had a certain poetic resonance, a mirror to their own absurd initial salvo. This, however, was for trespassing, for property damage. That rotten plank, after all, now demonstrably needed replacing ahead of schedule, a fact my meticulously kept records would support, for harassment, and for the sheer unmitigated gall of their continued campaign against me and my family. A campaign documented through text messages and HOA emails. My legal team, a group more accustomed to corporate warfare than suburban squabbles, but who nonetheless relished a righteous fight, had it prepared with surgical precision. The evidence was irrefutable. The high-definition security footage of Brenda's unauthorized excursion, complete with her dramatic aquatic finale. The clear no trespassing signs she ignored. The police report detailing their previous false claim and the resulting fine against the HOA, my property deeds, once again making a star appearance. This wasn't vengeance served cold. It was justice delivered at ambient temperature. A meticulously documented, legally lethal instrument designed to dismantle their arrogance piece by piece. It was served to the HOA board, not with a theatrical flourish, but with the quiet efficiency of a process server who has seen it all and is impressed by nothing. The shockwave, I imagined, would be delightful, a smash cut in their comfortable narrative. They had sowed discord. They would reap a lawsuit, a consequence of their own making. The final act unfolded not in a courtroom, but in the sterile beige confines of the HOA's monthly meeting room, a place usually reserved for debates over lawn ornaments and paint swatches. This time the agenda was singular. My counterclaim, the public reckoning. The air was thick with a tension that could have been cut with one of their own meticulously enforced pruning shears. I wasn't there physically. My presence was felt through the weight of the legal documents now in their hands, through the grim face of their retained counsel who clearly knew a losing battle when he saw one. Brenda, I was told later by a gleeful neighbor now emboldened by the shifting tides, my eccentric conspiracy theorist ally who'd been cataloging HOA abuses for years, sat pale and diminished, the bluster gone, replaced by a creeping dread. The public reckoning was quiet but devastating. The HOA's lawyer, in hushed, funereal tones, explained the legal realities, the indefensibility of their position, the sheer folly of their crusade against a man who not only owned the lake but also possessed an unyielding resolve and the resources to back it up, exposing the local corruption ties between their overreach and their disregard for actual law. There were no dramatic outbursts, just the slow, dawning realization on the faces of the board members that they had profoundly, catastrophically misjudged their target. The 500 figure, once their weapon of choice, now hung over them like a guillotine. They settled, of course. The amount was confidential, but the capitulation was total, a news headline whispered through the community. Brenda was quietly removed from her position. The reign of petty tyranny was over. That evening, I walked to my dock. The air was clean. The porch light on my house switched on, a small beacon of order restored, of boundaries reasserted. The locked gate to my property, newly oiled, swung shut with a satisfying, final click. Psychological closure. Some people, it seems, only understand fences when they're hit with the bill for trying to tear them down. They crossed the line. They paid the price. You won't believe what happened, but you just read it.